Hello. Oh, that was fast. Late as usual. I'm never late. A day for a year. So is what I'm gonna do is so I have to switch back and forth. So my friend who is an American Baptist talks about what it means to be an American Baptist on his podcast, which we're going to play, and then I'm going to let it run, and then I'm going to stop it, and then I'm going to comment on it. I'll probably do that, probably start and stop it, a few times. And I may switch to just listening so I can do it quicker, but we'll see. But I want to play this intro. So is what you need to do immediately is go and subscribe to his channel. Here's the original video. You can do that. Hopefully the background noise isn't too bad. Okay. Let's hear what he has to say. And I'm going to pretend like I didn't listen to it once already, and react to it. So, oh, whoops. Did I tell you that? Just kidding. Okay, let's go.
On the one hand, being an American Baptist is a relatively simple thing. We're like most other Baptists. And yet, American Baptists have a long and storied and interesting legacy within the Christian tradition, specifically within the Baptist tradition. And so in this video, my hope is to explore and explain in a few minutes, nothing too long or heavy, what it means to be an American Baptist in terms of theology and polity. That is how the church is run. So thank you for being here. I'm Reverend Nick Quince, or you can just call me Nick. I'm the pastor of First Baptist Church of Palos Verdes here in the South Bay area in Los Angeles. And being an American Baptist is an interesting thing for many reasons. One is when you tell someone that you're a pastor, they usually go, oh, cool. And if they're have some sort of background, they usually ask, what kind of pastor? And you're like, Baptist. And then they kind of give you a look like, And then after that, you usually say, but I'm American Baptist. And they're like, cool. And that means what exactly, right? And so an American Baptist, just a little bit of history, we essentially we became the Northern Baptist after we split from the Southern Baptist over a fairly minor issue called slavery.
Don't you like him already? Because obviously I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, so we're kind of comparing. I wanted to give this kind of an intro. So I even shaved for this. So this is interesting. I would like to talk to Nick about what the date was on this, because obviously the Adventists were right in the thick of it, right there, getting started in like 1863. Yeah. He says you should just come in. We should talk about this, but we'll keep going for now. But so like I tell Baptists that dude, we actually have a lot in common, but I guess I'm always running into Southern Baptists and they're like unhinged a lot of the time. But like the Northern Baptists, like he's saying, is kind of, they're not called the Northern Baptists like he's going to explain here, but Adventists obviously are very similar, because Adventism started in America also. And of course he's saying they broke off. So it's like, you're not going to find any Northern Baptists or Adventists with, slaves. If you find one, let us know. But, it's kind of a big deal, I guess. Some churches built their churches on the backs of, chattel slaves, whatever. To each his own, I guess. Seems like some people said no, thank you. We're gonna go with not slavery. Just saying. I like that.
And we became the Northern Baptist Convention, and we kind of grew out of that, the American Baptist, and now we're called, I believe it's since 1972 or so, we became the American Baptist Churches USA, of which I've been licensed and ordained. And so we've been basically Baptist since there were Baptists, not quite as far back as John the Baptist, but we've been Baptist ever since Baptists have existed. We can trace kind of our lineage to that. And so that's just a bit of history. We have about 10 or so seminaries, specifically probably the most influential would be Northern Seminary, or at least of today, out in Chicago area. But we have a lot of seminaries back on the East Coast. American Baptists geographically are mostly confined's not the right word, but mostly found in the East Coast and the Midwest. Although we do have a fairly strong contingent element out here in greater Los Angeles or the Pacific Southwest where I live. And so that's kind of who we are, at least at a historical level. Theologically, we're very similar to other Baptists. We believe in believer's baptism. That is the person, he or she, when they come of age and faith, and that can be fairly flexible. I have a 4-year-old son who is incredibly wise beyond his years. And if he came to me and said, Dad, I want to be baptized, I'd be like, let's have the conversation, son. But we believe in believer's baptism upon a profession of faith. And we do not believe that baptism saves you in and of itself, but it is an outward sign of your allegiance and faith in Jesus Christ. And so your average, and I'm speaking for myself as an American Baptist, and this leads into another issue or facet of being an American Baptist, and that is we're congregationalists, that we are autonomous churches who affiliate voluntarily with regions or the denomination. And so American Baptist churches are very diverse politically, theologically, racially, culturally, socioeconomically, and so on and so forth. So for example, in my region, as a white dude, I am probably in the minority in terms of ordained ministers who serve. And so so that tells you whenever you go to an American Baptist church, each American Baptist church has a lot of autonomy, or what we call freedom. We believe in the priesthood of all believers, that every person has equal access to God. You don't have to go to a pastor to confess your sins or anything like that. So in that sense, we're not particularly Roman Catholic, and thus not particularly high church. We're far more, you might say, this is not always the best word, but far more democratic with how we think and engage. Every person has a vote and one vote. The pastor doesn't have 10 votes. He or she has one vote if they vote at all. And so American Baptist churches, generally speaking, are autonomous, and they are engaged in kind of that sort of ministry. We have a long legacy of biblical social justice. So in that sense, we are fairly similar to the Methodist or the Wesleyan tradition. And so you can see kind of that sort of paradigm of church being kind of taught, or at least kind of seen a little bit. And because of that freedom of the local church to make their own decisions as it relates to polity or to theology or to practice, that leads to a lot of diversity. So out of all the mainline denominations, you have the PCUSA, the ELCA, the Episcopal Church, and the United Methodist Church, and so on. All of them would be considered theologically, and there's always exceptions to this, but generally you would see a lot of theological liberalism or theological progressivism. It's not quite as simple in the American Baptist Churches USA. Out of all the mainline denominations, there are 7 of them. I believe there's 6 or 7. We are the only one that has that is not what we call fully affirming, because again, we are autonomous local churches. So there are churches in my denomination that are affirming of LGBTQ issues and stuff like that. My church is not, as I am not. I'm traditional, or I don't like the phrase conservative, but I hold to what I believe to be a traditional sexual ethic as I find in Holy Scripture.
Okay, this is interesting. I think this is very similar to the Adventist Church. And I recall, it sounds like they have a slightly little bit more autonomy, obviously. So pastors have to answer to the general conference, but that is a ground up sort of. So like when we vote on stuff at the annual conferences, if I recall, I'm not super involved with that sort of thing, but since I'm just a lay person, I don't care that much about it. It seems like the churches send a representative from every church, sort of thing, and then that group gets to vote with a representative, which is voted on from the church ground floor up, if I remember. But I could be wrong on that. Churches are in our church. You can like the conference can cut you off if you're affirming or whatever, if I recall too. So, but there are things they're lenient on in that way. So, but we are similar in that sense. Because we're born and kind of cut from the same cloth. Let's see, what was the other? Oh yeah, and as far I would like Nick should just come in here. Is what we should do. No, you look cool, man. But I should ask you to just come in. But I'm going to keep going here. Obviously, I agree with the Wesleyan sort of perspective. We didn't talk about that yet, but the free will sort of thing, and then not having slaves and the church people from the ground up not being super liturgical in that sense. Obviously, we believe in a believer's baptism. Now, that was it. So I'll tell you my experience. I wanted to get baptized in the 4th grade. And I was like, and there's like he said, there's like leniency within churches, like pastors kind of make that decision. I've never heard of an Adventist really getting baptized before like 9 years old or so. And I was baptized at 11 as a personal decision. And then they kind of shepherded me beforehand, because you have to like affirm and understand the doctrines, which some people don't like that. They'll just baptize you. And I can see advantages to that, biblical reasons for that idea. But I would say it makes sense to me to I wouldn't think I'd let a 5-year-old unless he was a genius, like Nick's kid. Maybe I would, I guess. But yeah, like they were hesitant with me at age 11, but they totally did it because I knew they'd kind of see if you really know what you're talking about. And I kind of, when I look back on it, I think, seemed a little early, but that's just my intuition on that. And so, but I know Baptists are that way, nobody's perfect. No, I'm kidding. Okay. I'll just keep listening.
And so that leads on that contentious debate. My church is conservative or traditional on that, but not every church is. And now there are a lot of churches, for example, in Metro Chicagoland or New York area that are far more progressive. And there are some that are more moderate in figuring it out and stuff like that. But so you can see that freedom is amazing because it allows you to do kind of what you feel called to do by the Spirit. It gives you a lot of flexibility as it relates to doctrine and theology, although not to the fullest extent of that. But that also comes with a caveat or what we might call pros and cons. The con is that you do have churches in the denomination which are very, very progressive. For example, when I went to a church in Evanston, Illinois, I walk in and this looks, there's pride flags everywhere. There's Buddhist stuff. There's New Age stuff. There's political, basically it looked like the front office of the DNC. So it was one of those, I'm like, it's not saying you can't be a Democrat and be a Baptist and vote or anything like that. But it was one of those, I walked in, I'm like, this is not a church, if that makes sense. This has become a front office for the DNC. And so, so there are those kinds of churches, and there are churches more like my church. And so on the contentious issues of our day theologically, there tends to be not a lot of Reformed theology in our denomination, but that's not to say there isn't any element of that or any people that hold to that. So that we tend to be far more Arminian or free will Baptist in the kind of way we think. We tend to believe in we tend to affirm the death of Christ as being for all people. That there's no one outside the scope of God's love and care for them, as we believe Christ died for everyone. So we believers' baptism, the autonomy of the local church, generally Arminian, not exclusively so, of course. And we are diverse on the issue of sexual ethics. Specifically, you find a range in our churches. And that's why, while we are called the mainline denomination, and historically we are, it's not quite so simple. Some regions are more conservative than others, and some regions are more liberal than others. And so You can see a video on that question on my channel. I did one about a couple weeks ago. So if you're interested in that, just look for the appropriate thumbnail and you can watch that one. But the other issue that makes us distinct from, say, Southern Baptist and more what's often called conservative denominations, although I don't really like the phrase conservative. I know I've used it, but it's kind of just how the language is used, is that we do affirm the ordination of women. That is, called and gifted women can serve in any position of leadership in an American Baptist church. There are, of course, exceptions in terms of practice. Some churches do affirm women in ministry, but aren't comfortable with it. Some are openly complementarian or patriarchal, depending on how that works out. But your average American Baptist church is not particularly ideologically complementarian. We tend to be fairly egalitarian in function and how we engage with one another. So we are egalitarian generally, and specifically that does have a lot of historical precedent where what would become the American Baptist Churches USA, have ordained women for well over a century before the fundamentalist controversy of the 1920s, Machen, Princeton, and all that sort of stuff. And so we've been ordaining women before there was that sort of liberalism, and these churches were in the Midwest. These are not these aren't churches that are bastions of liberalism. And so your average American Baptist is fairly egalitarian, although probably there are exceptions. Believes in believers' baptism, believes in the autonomy of the local church, probably does believe in spiritual gifts. So that we would be continuationist, but we tend to be fairly low key at most of our churches. We're a little more laid back than, say, our Pentecostal brothers and sisters.
Before I forget too much what he said, so this is interesting. So obviously, like he said, they've been ordaining women for over 100 years. So you can't, when he had it, I had Nick on to talk about this subject of women ordination and this roles of men and women. You can check that out along with other stuff that Nick's written. By the way, Nick is a theologian, pastor, and he's getting his PhD, but he has his master's, and so he's an actual scholar, not just some pastor that walked in off the street because he had a KJV Bible he grew up with in Louisiana or something. Although that's fine, I guess, in certain circumstances. No, but so you can't blame the women ordination in their denomination, sounds like, on liberalism. 100 years. Now, this is interesting because Adventists have been traditionally complementarian in the sense that they don't ordain women as head pastors, which some people have found absurd because of the nature of our denomination and the founders. But she seemed to be sort of egalitarian too, but it's an interesting issue because, and I played some videos on that, and I'll be playing both sides of the argument, by the way. I'm not super biased on this. I do lean in that direction that Nick is espousing, but so there's kind of a battle going on in Adventism here on that, and among the scholars anyway. The laity is mostly fairly patriarchal, although more complementarian, if you want to say that. I'm not really quite sure what those distinctions are. It seems like the whole complementarian versus egalitarian can get kind of foggy and exactly what's meant when you talk about the home and then the church or whatever. What was the other thing he said? Oh yeah, Adventists too are. Now, this is interesting too, because I've noticed this growing up in the Adventist church. We are certainly a Wesleyan Arminian, Protestant view, not Calvinistic, but you do see, so you really can't be Adventist and not be Arminian Wesleyan, even more kind of free willish, because if you understand the theology that undergirds kind of like the movement, it's really just a free will theodicy, like by necessity. But a lot of people don't really realize that, and you see in churches sort of like God chose me, sort of like, or like hints of total depravity in a Calvinistic way. I've seen that kind of influence in, but Adventists don't really care about that sort of stuff. We're more focused on eschatology and like Jesus is coming back, and remember the Sabbath, and the food laws aren't done away with. And so we're always focusing on that sort of stuff in outreach and like holiness, which is another thing that's similar to sort of Nick's persuasion. And I don't think he's going to talk about it in this, but that's why it's so easy being Nick's friend, even though we're basically like brothers. We have very similar toothsayer. Don't text and don't text and drive, dude. Stop joshing me with your snarky comments, man. Anyway, what was the other thing? See, I should have wrote notes down. Yeah, I'd like to sort of kind of get cringy at people who say, "Oh, if you let women come in to be pastors, um, you're gonna everything's gonna come down." Look at every church that did that. Well, it's kind of a I don't know if that holds water. I think that's a little bit. That's like saying that's like causation. Correlation does not equal causation, sort of thing. I don't think that's. What if women need to be pastors because Jesus is about to come back and we need to go full throttle with the gifts of the Spirit and ministering to people, and we shouldn't hold back women from God's promise to pour out His Spirit on all flesh. Anyway, back to the thing.
We affirm believers' baptism, that when the person comes of faith and has the capacity to make a saving profession in Jesus Christ as their Lord, then they are baptized upon that. We also, of course, it goes without saying, we believe in the Trinity, the authority of Scripture. American Baptists tend not to be creedal. We tend not to like creeds. I'm personally okay with creeds. I think the Nicene Creed is kind of a helpful biblical summary of what it means to believe in Jesus and to be a Christian. But there is kind of because we believe in the priesthood of all believers and autonomy, and that is freedom of the human person to engage with God, to pray, and to have no mediator between them except except Jesus Christ. That does leave a lot of kind of don't tell me what to do in American Baptist churches. Now, we love debate. We get along really well together. We celebrate the Lord's Supper. We do all that, and we don't require you believe a certain way or vote a certain way on most things. But we do have a very strong individualized kind of understanding of what it means to be the church. And so that has its pros and has its cons. It can lead to kind of an identitarianism that means we kind of it's very easy to become a country club, although that can happen in the PCUSA or the UMC or what have you. And so that's kind of what it means to be an American Baptist. We are generally egalitarian. We are believers. We believe in believers' baptism. We believe in the Lord's Supper. We hold to we're not particularly liturgical with that, although there are churches with liturgical elements, of course. But your average American Baptist church is not particularly liturgical or high church. And so we do require, generally speaking, seminary training for ministers and for those seeking to be ordained. Out of all of our seminaries, the one I find to be the most helpful and the most orthodox and the most rigorous in training is Northern Seminary out in Chicago. But we do have a presence at Fuller Seminary, and we do get a lot of ministers from across the spectrum of seminaries. The more mainline or progressive you get, the more you tend to go to the UCC seminaries or the PCUSA seminaries or what have you. And so our denomination is diverse, racially, politically, theologically, and you begin to find very quickly that you don't quite know what you're getting when you go to an American Baptist church. And so
Exactly. That's the problem, man. Full of hippies and liberals. No, I'm just kidding. Well, that's the con of being so autonomous. But I tend to have that sort of spirit too. Like, obviously, so everything he just talked about, except for that last part, is like that's identical to Adventists. Is believers' baptism. Um, we take communion. Our beliefs come from the Word of God. There's like a core set of beliefs. Obviously, we're Trinitarian. We don't have that's the other thing. We don't have a creed. Bible alone is our creed, and then people give us a bunch of garbage for that. But obviously, we can affirm. I think we can affirm the Nicene Creed too. Seems to me. Although I won't get into that, but we try to avoid that because of our roots. And that's one of the ways Baptists are very similar as far as how they handle Scripture and source of doctrine, and sort of rejecting sort of the historical Catholic Orthodox view of those sorts of things. Like we obviously don't, we believe like you have to repent. People have different ideas about what that means, but you don't have to do it through your pastor, your priest, or something like that. You don't have to have, but we also, Adventists also, I think you have to be ordained by the seminaries for us anyway. I didn't quite, it sounded like he said there might be some circumstance where you don't have to be ordained. I think to be a head of maybe I'm not sure. I should be careful what I say here, but it seems like you have to have a degree to be a pastor in the Adventist church. But then there's like evangelists. I'm not sure exactly what the qualifications are. I'm sure if for a church you have to have I don't know, whatever it is, MDiv or whatever. Let's finish it up. I mean, Baptists are so similar to Adventists in that way. Oh, by the way, and his church, I think his church that he mentioned at the beginning is like, I think he rents it from Seventh-day Adventists. That's what it looks like, anyways, because it looks identical to like your average Adventist church. I'm just kidding, but his church looks like my church I grew up in. So in Green Lake, Seattle, and so and now you can watch Nick's post his sermons and see it's just identical to an Adventist, your average Adventist, small to medium sized church. Looks the same. They operate almost identically.
If you made it this far, let me tell you what would happen, for example, if you came to my church, which is the First Baptist Church of Palos Verdes, just near Torrance and Long Beach, for those of you who are living in Los Angeles. And we worship at 11 a.m. on Sunday mornings. You would be welcome. If you walk in, you will find a largely older congregation of seasoned Christians who love Jesus, who work together very well, that love new people. What makes our church as an American Baptist church distinctive is that we are conservative on the question of sexual ethics. Politically, we're fairly, there's, you have some fairly conservative folks, you have some fairly moderate folks, but we're not a particularly hardcore partisan group. We do, generally speaking, seem to affirm women as pastors or as ministers. My wife is very well respected and treated well. We love, while we're an older congregation, we love having kiddos around. My son, who's 4 years old, runs around the congregation doing all sorts of stuff, and they love it. We play the organ, and so we have classic hymns. We have a PowerPoint for folks, but we have hymns that we read and sing. I try to preach expositionally. We do a call and response. There's lots of standing and sitting because we stand for worship, we stand for the doxology, and we do our tithes and offerings. And so it's a very low key, very simple service that does focus on preaching, but also on exhortation and fellowship together after the service is done. And so that's kind of what it's like at our church. I don't know if any of you have had experiences in American Baptist churches, but while we are mainline, our disposition generally is fairly mixed. You have mainline, you have evangelical, and you have very progressive. And so my church, for those who are interested, would be considered neither fundamentalist nor liberal. We are what is often called evangelical in the best sense of the term, meaning we believe in the proclamation of the word, we believe in soul care, we believe in winning hearts and souls to Jesus, and we believe in discipleship and teaching. And so American Baptist churches tend to have a far more strong emphasis on education. We like our ministers and our laity to be educated. It doesn't mean you have to be seminary trained per se, but we really, that's something we view very strongly. So we're not as touched by, for example, the issues of dispensationalism or young earth creationism. It's not to say there aren't folks that hold to that or anything like that, but you mentioned 6-day creationism in American Baptist church, even the more conservative ones like mine, and people kind of just look at you and go, that's interesting. Like, it's just not that whole debate has kind of just missed us, if that makes sense. It's not really a thing. My background, and I wasn't raised American Baptist, I was raised in Calvary Chapel, was very much about that. So when I went to an American Baptist church and discovered there wasn't all this pride flags over there and there wasn't all this fundamentalist stuff over there or what have you, and I was like, oh, this is fairly normal, fairly low key, and fairly just genuine. Like, the buildings tend to be fairly nice. We tend to like our old buildings, but we love the organ. And there's something about simple worship leading to simple faith that causes us to live simple lives of holiness. And so if that's of interest to you, you're welcome to the First Baptist Church of Palos Verdes. If you like this video, please give it a like, subscribe, share, leave a comment. But yeah, what's your experience in the American Baptist Churches USA? Let me know. I'm really curious, because as someone who became American Baptist when I met my wife, or my girlfriend at the time, back in an undergrad, it was a whole new experience. There was a generosity there, theologically and politically, that wasn't in my background. And we are generally a fairly hospitable denomination. And I think my church exemplifies that because, well, they've welcomed me, and, and they're just very, very kind people. And so thank you for watching. I'm Nick, and this is the New Testament Theologist YouTube channel, where we seek to glorify God through the use of our minds and through the preaching of the word and through teaching, especially. So God bless you, and I will see you next time. And if I'm so blessed by it, see you on Sunday. God bless.
Was that showing the whole time? Let me see. Something went weird on my screen here. Are you guys just staring at me that whole time? I hope not. Okay, good. He was okay. Yeah. Obviously, as Adventists, we care about young Earth creationism, but it's an interesting thing with Adventists. So we don't read, like, when you, like, as far as hermeneutically, like fundamentalism, Adventists are not. It's weird. There's weird overlap, and a lot of Adventists would, like, the technically, like, the literalist reading, dispensational reading. We aren't that, but we are like champions of young Earth creationism, obviously, because of the Sabbath issue, which I hold to firmly, right? But, like, there's certain battles to be fought or not, right? So I can chill with sort of that perspective. Like you said, it just sort of missed them, right? And there's you can't fight every battle all the time, and yeah. So Kenny asks, he would be curious how Nick defines holiness. Probably a lot like you, Kenny, in a certain sense, anyway. As far as he's a Wesleyan Arminian, right? Yeah, I'm not prepared to talk about. I'd want to brush up on that before I said too much. But to me, holiness has to do with obedience and love and faithfulness towards what God says to do, and then reflecting that to other human image bearers. That's kind of my idea. Having a healthy, proper fear of God, but then that's the beginning of wisdom, and then you grow in. If you're walking in love and you have the heart of Christ towards others, there's nothing you're experiencing a relationship with God, and so there's nothing to fear. Just when you know God, why would you be afraid? I mean, it seems so obvious to me, and I think Nick would probably agree. I'm reading Nick's book, which, by the way, I'll just throw him a promotion here. Obviously, I think you should keep the Sabbath. I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. He has his church on Sunday, but Nick has a lot of similarities too, like with other things in particular, like, which he's free to have based on sort of the structure of his church, which is cool. A little more free than I would say an Adventist church, because we have kind of a focus on our mission as Adventists to believe in, bringing people into obedience to the Sabbath and what we understand the Bible to be saying before Jesus comes back. And so that would be one of the major differences, obviously. But structurally and sort of foundationally regarding, sort of the Protestant stuff, we're like identical, I would argue. Although a lot of Southern Baptists say, you are nothing like us, but what they really mean is you're not once saved, always saved. And of course, I'm sure Nick's church has both views, but Nick's church is obviously not once saved, always saved, and being Wesleyan. But his book that you can check out. I also, if you go to my, like I said, I posted his channel in the comments. Also, let's see, I want to get the publisher right here. The Perfection of Our Faithful Wills. I'm reading that right now, and I'll be reporting on this. Paul's apocalyptic vision of entire sanctification. The Perfection of Our Faithful Wills by Nicholas Quint, Quient. His name is obviously in the description. And it is, let's see, WIPF, width in stock, imprint. Let's see, yeah. And you can go to their.com. This is 5 years old now, looks like. I can't show it to you on the screen, but you can look it up. And also, like I said, I posted some of his some things he's written and presented or published. I can't remember which for sure, but presented at a symposium. You can check my community page and see some of it, and you can get it from academia.edu, which it's posted. The link is posted on my community page. But yeah, hopefully I can have a conversation with Nick later and kind of ask him some more questions to get deeper into it. Yeah, we should. Yeah, sure, Kenny, can do that. So check out his channel. If you're one of my subscribers, I suggest subscribing to it. You should. Nick has been a really good friend as an academic. Having him come on and present information, someone who's actually trained and has actual. He's an actual theologian, so I really appreciate his friendship and being accepting of me, even though we have differences. So. And similarities. So thanks, buddy, for being my friend. And God bless.